The alarm on Elena Vasquez's phone went off at 4:47 in the morning, 13 minutes before it was supposed to, as if the universe itself couldn't wait to remind her that rest was a luxury she hadn't earned yet. She lay still for exactly 3 seconds. That was all she allowed herself, staring at the water-stained ceiling of the studio apartment she rented on the eastern edge of Hartford, Connecticut. 3 seconds to feel tired. 3 seconds to wish things were different. And then she sat up because Lily was still sleeping, and the whole world could fall apart as long as Lily was still sleeping peacefully. Elena was 28 years old, and she had the kind of life that looked, from the outside, like a series of unfortunate decisions. A teenage marriage to a man who turned out to be more charm than character. A divorce at 24 that left her with a toddler, a duffel bag, and approximately $400 in a checking account. A string of waitressing jobs, cleaning jobs, babysitting gigs, and one very brief and deeply regrettable attempt at selling handmade candles on Etsy. Now she worked as a live-in maid, though the proper term on her contract was household management specialist, for Nathaniel Hargrove, the 33-year-old founder and CEO of Hargrove Capital, whose estate sat on 12 acres in the wealthiest pocket of Hartford like a museum that had somehow gotten the wrong address. The arrangement was unusual. She knew that. Most people who worked for Nathaniel Hargrove were not permitted to bring their children to work. But Elena's regular babysitter, Mrs. Kowalski from down the hall, had broken her hip 3 weeks ago, and the agency that employed Elena had been on the verge of letting her go when Nathaniel himself, in that flat, unbothered voice he used for everything from firing executives to ordering coffee, had simply said, "Bring the child. The house is large enough." Person who has never once doubted her own importance. When Elena carried her into the Hargrove estate that first morning, still half asleep and clutching a stuffed rabbit named Gerald, Lily had looked up at the vaulted ceilings, the twin marble staircases, the chandelier that cost more than Elena's car, and said, with tremendous authority, "Mama. Big house." "Yes, baby," Elena had whispered. "Big house." Gerald likes it, Lily had decided, and that had apparently settled the matter. Nathaniel Hargrove did not like children. This was not a secret. His executive assistant, a brisk woman named Patricia, who communicated almost entirely in calendar invites, had warned Elena on her first day. Mr. Hargrove values silence and order above all things. The child must not disturb him. She must not touch his things, enter his private study, approach him at his desk, or speak to him during working hours. She had delivered these instructions with a kind of practiced efficiency that suggested she had given them before and fully expected them to be violated. Nathaniel himself was rarely home, and when he was, he moved through his own house like a man passing through an airport, present but absent, physically there but mentally somewhere several time zones away. He was not unkind, exactly. He was simply sealed. Like a house whose windows had been painted shut so long ago that no one remembered anymore what the view from inside used to look like. Elena had noticed small things about him in those first weeks. The way he took his coffee, black, no sugar, always slightly too hot, as if he needed the discomfort to stay present. The way he stood at his study window in the early evenings, not looking at anything in particular, just standing there with his hands in his pockets, like a man waiting for a train that had already left. The way his jaw tightened whenever his phone rang after 9 o'clock, which it always did, because his business operated across multiple continents and time zones did not care about his jaw. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not let herself feel sorry for people who had everything. It seemed deeply irresponsible. But she noticed. On the morning everything changed, Elena was running behind. It was a Tuesday in early October, and the estate was hosting a dinner party that evening for 14 of Nathaniel's business associates, which meant Elena had been on her feet since before sunrise, polishing silver, steaming tablecloths, coordinating with the caterers who kept arriving at the wrong entrance. Lily had been an angel all morning, sitting in the corner of the kitchen with her crayons and Gerald and an inexhaustible imagination, narrating elaborate stories to herself in a whisper that Elena found deeply comforting even when she couldn't quite make out the words. By early afternoon, Lily was drooping. Elena could see the signs, the slow blinks, the way she kept leaning sideways, the increasingly incoherent storylines she was assigning to Gerald, who apparently was now a firefighter and also a princess and also, for reasons Elena couldn't follow, a dentist. She needed a nap. Elena needed to finish the dining room. Neither of these things could happen at the same time in the same place. She made a decision. She would spend the next several hours alternately defending and regretting. Nathaniel's personal car, a dark navy Bentley that he used for client meetings and occasionally just for driving alone on nights when Elena suspected he couldn't sleep, was parked in the attached garage, which was warm and quiet and separated from the rest of the house's mid-afternoon activity. The back seat was wider than some beds Elena had slept in. She spread Lily's small fleece blanket across it, settled her daughter down with Gerald tucked under her chin, and kissed her forehead. 20 minutes, baby, she whispered. Mama's right inside. Lily was asleep before Elena reached the garage door. What Elena did not know, could not have known, was that Nathaniel had canceled his afternoon meetings. She hadn't received the notification because Patricia had sent it to the main estate email, which Elena checked at the beginning and end of each day and not in between. She did not know that he had spent the better part of an hour in his study, then given up on whatever he'd been trying to accomplish, and decided to drive. He often drove when he couldn't think. He found that the motion helped. Something about forward movement when everything else felt stuck.
She did not know any of this.
She was in the dining room, polishing the third candlestick in a set of 14, when she heard the garage door open. She didn't think anything of it. Not at first. And then, 2 seconds later, her brain caught up with her ears, and she dropped the candlestick directly onto the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot, and she ran. Nathaniel Hargrove had built his empire on the principle that emotion was a liability. He had learned this lesson not from a business school professor or a mentor in a corner office, but from his father, who had been the kind of man who felt everything deeply and loudly and catastrophically, and who had consequently destroyed everything he touched, 2 businesses, 3 marriages, and eventually his relationship with the only child who had kept trying to love him long after it made any rational sense. Nathaniel had been 17 when he stopped trying, 20 when he made his first serious investment, 26 when Hargrove Capital turned its first million, 31 when Forbes put his face on a cover with a headline that used the word visionary, which he had found faintly embarrassing and entirely beside the point. He was 33 now, and he owned 12 acres of Connecticut real estate, a penthouse in Manhattan, a flat in London he visited twice a year, and approximately nothing that could not be quantified in dollars and appreciated over time. He didn't think of this as emptiness. He thought of it as efficiency. He pressed the button on the garage door remote that lived in his jacket pocket. He was meticulous about small conveniences and walked toward the Bentley with his mind already 3 steps ahead, calculating the route he'd take, the roads that would be clear at this hour, the particular rhythm of driving at a speed slightly higher than was legal when no one was watching. It grounded him. It was the closest thing he had in recent years to peace. He opened the driver's side door. He adjusted his seat out of habit, though no one else drove this car. He reached for the ignition. And then he heard it. It was the softest sound he had encountered in years. Not silence. He knew silence well, had spent enormous amounts of money engineering it into every room of his home, but something richer than silence. Something breathing. He turned. In the back seat, curled beneath a small fleece blanket printed with yellow stars, lay the tiniest human being he had seen up close since he was a child himself. She was perhaps 3 years old, with dark curls fanned out against the leather seat and one small fist tucked under her cheek. She was holding a rabbit, a truly battered rabbit, clearly beloved to the point of structural compromise, and she was sleeping with the absolute, unguarded, trusting completeness that only children and people with entirely clean consciences can manage. Nathaniel sat very still. He was a man who knew what to do in every situation his life had presented him. Boardroom ambushes, hostile acquisitions, investors who wanted blood and journalists who wanted scandal. He had a response protocol, a communications team, a legal department, and an instinct honed over 15 years of high-stakes decision-making. He had no protocol for this. The little girl shifted in her sleep, pulling the rabbit closer, and made a small sound, not distress, just the involuntary conversational murmur of a deeply sleeping toddler, as if she were negotiating something pleasant in her dream. Her blanket slipped slightly. Without thinking, and this was the thing that would startle him later, when he had time to examine it, without thinking at all, Nathaniel reached back and pulled it up to her chin. He stared at his own hand afterward, as if it belonged to someone else. He should get out of the car. That was obvious. He should go find Elena, the maid, the child's mother, the woman who had been working in his house for 3 weeks and who he had spoken to perhaps 4 times, always briefly, always about something logistical. He should address the situation professionally and calmly and establish that this could not happen again. He stayed in the car. He told himself it was because he didn't want to wake her. This was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth was something he wouldn't let himself look at directly yet. The way this child's presence in his back seat had done something to the carefully pressurized atmosphere inside his chest, something he didn't have a word for because he hadn't needed the word in a very long time. The garage was quiet. Outside, the October afternoon was doing the particular golden thing it did in Connecticut in the fall, that amber-heavy light that made even ordinary things look briefly worth looking at. In here, it was just Nathaniel and a sleeping 3-year-old and a rabbit, and the strange, suspended quality of a moment that he already somehow knew he would remember. He was still sitting there, in the driver's seat, doing absolutely nothing, when the door to the house flew open, and Elena appeared. She looked, in that first instant, like a woman who had imagined every terrible thing that could have happened and had run the entire distance between imagination and reality in about 4 seconds. Her face was white. Her eyes went immediately to the back seat, and when she saw Lily, safe, sleeping, blanket pulled to her chin, he watched something enormous move through her. Relief so large, it was almost violent. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. She needed to sleep and I didn't have anywhere to. The nanny called out and Mrs. Kowalski has her hip, and I thought you were in your study and I'm so sorry. She's fine. I'll get her. This will never." "She's fine," Nathaniel said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Elena blinked, clearly expecting something different from him. Anger, maybe. The kind of cold, formal disappointment that could end an employment contract. "She's been asleep the whole time," he said. "I didn't want to wake her." There was a long pause in which Elena looked at him the way people sometimes looked at him when he said something that didn't match their image of him, not quite suspicious, but searching, trying to locate the hidden logic. "She usually sleeps 45 minutes, Elena said carefully. "Then she has 22 minutes left," Nathaniel said. "Roughly." Another pause. Elena's expression did something complicated. Then, because apparently she too had run out of protocol, she sat down on the concrete floor of the garage, leaned her back against the car, and pressed her fingers to her eyes. He almost asked if she was all right. He stopped himself. She was clearly not all right, and she clearly knew she wasn't all right, and asking seemed redundant. Instead, He sat in the driver's seat of his Bentley while Elena Vasquez sat on the garage floor, and together they waited for her daughter to wake up. He would never be entirely sure, afterward, which of them needed that quiet more. Lily woke up the way she did everything, with complete commitment and no warning whatsoever. One moment she was deeply, profoundly asleep. The next, she was sitting bolt upright in the back seat of a car she had never properly examined in daylight, looking around with the sharp, immediate alertness of a small person who had decided that being awake was now the priority and sleep was entirely in the past. "Mama," she said. Elena was on her feet instantly. The garage door was still up, the afternoon light streaming in, and she appeared at the back window with an expression that had mostly recovered its composure. "Hey, baby. Right here." Lily considered this for a moment. Then she looked at the man in the front seat. Nathaniel had, in the 22 minutes since Elena had sat down on the garage floor, conducted an entirely internal debate about whether to simply exit the vehicle and allow the reunion to happen without his involvement. He had decided, and he was still not entirely sure why, to stay. Partly because leaving felt more awkward than remaining. Partly because the sleeping child had placed him in a strange, suspended state that he wasn't quite ready to exit. Now the child was awake, and she was looking at him. He had been evaluated by investors, interrogated by journalists, sized up by competitors, and stared down by his own reflection in boardroom windows at 2 a.m. He had never felt quite as thoroughly assessed as he did under the gaze of this 3-year-old, who was doing it with the open, undefended directness that adults spend their entire lives learning to conceal.
"Hi," Lily said.
"Hi," Nathaniel said. Lily held up Gerald. "This is Gerald." "Hello, Gerald," Nathaniel said, and something in the absolute straightforwardness of it, the sheer absurdity of Nathaniel Hargrove greeting a structurally compromised stuffed rabbit by name, made Elena make a sound behind her hand that might have been a suppressed laugh or might have been something else entirely. "Gerald wants to know your name," Lily said. She was very serious about this. She was not playing. Gerald genuinely wanted to know. "Nathaniel," he said. And then, because it seemed insufficient, "Nate." Lily processed this. "That's a big name." "It is," he agreed. "Gerald thinks so too," Lily reported. She looked around the interior of the car with the expression of a small person conducting a professional appraisal. She placed one hand flat on the leather seat beside her and pressed down, testing it. "This is a nice car," she said. "Thank you." "Gerald has a car," Lily said conversationally. "It's red. It doesn't go anywhere because it's a toy, but Gerald thinks it's very good." She paused. "Your car is bigger." "Most cars are bigger than Gerald's car," Nathaniel pointed out. Lily considered the philosophical weight of this. "That's true," she conceded. "But Gerald's car is realer." She said this with tremendous confidence, as if the emotional reality of a toy car might exceed the practical reality of a Bentley, and she was not entirely wrong. Elena had opened the back door now and was reaching for her daughter, and Nathaniel expected that to be the end of it. Lily would be extracted, apologies would be made, the episode would be sealed off and filed under Does Not Repeat. But Lily did not immediately allow herself to be extracted. She was looking at Nathaniel with that devastating, uncomplicated attention. "Are you sad?" she asked. The question landed in the middle of the garage, like something dropped from a height. Elena's hand stilled. Nathaniel felt something move across his face that he couldn't quite control, not emotion or not only emotion, but the particular discomfort of being accurately perceived by someone who had no reason to be diplomatic about it. "Why do you ask that?" he said. His voice was very careful. Lily shrugged one small shoulder. "You look like the man in my book," she said. "He's sad because he doesn't have anybody to have adventures with. But then he gets a friend and it's better." She paused, consulting some internal authority. "Gerald says maybe you just need a friend." The silence that followed was one of the longest Nathaniel had experienced outside of a negotiation. "Lily," Elena said softly. There was no reproach in it, just the gentle redirect of a mother who understood that her daughter had said something true and enormous and needed to be eased away from it before it could become something neither adult in the garage knew how to handle. "It's fine," Nathaniel said. He meant it. Lily allowed herself to be lifted out of the car then, curling against her mother's shoulder with the immediate, uncomplicated trust that was simply her natural condition. She kept her eyes on Nathaniel as Elena carried her toward the house door, and just before Elena stepped inside, Lily leaned out from her mother's arms and held Gerald out in Nathaniel's direction, not offering him, exactly, but presenting him, as if Gerald were being introduced to someone who had passed a test. "Bye, Nate," Lily said. "Bye, Lily," he said.
The door closed.
Nathaniel sat in his car for another 6 minutes. He knew it was 6 minutes because he looked at his watch when Lily left, and again when he finally got out, and he spent those 6 minutes doing something he almost never permitted himself to do. He thought about what he actually felt. The dinner party that evening went flawlessly. The 14 guests ate beautifully prepared food and drank wine that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and discussed the kinds of things that people at dinner parties in Hartford discuss. And Nathaniel was present for all of it, present physically, present verbally, navigating conversation with the practiced ease of a man who has been doing it for 15 years. But twice, in the middle of conversations about market positioning and third-quarter projections, he thought about a rabbit named Gerald. And once, when a colleague laughed at something and Nathaniel smiled along, that automatic, calibrated smile he'd been using for years, he caught himself wondering whether it had always felt quite this hollow, or whether something in the garage that afternoon had made him newly aware of the distance between what he showed the world and what was actually happening inside him. He went to bed at midnight and lay awake until 2, which was not unusual. What was unusual was what he was thinking about when the sleep finally came. October gave way to November with a particular cruelty of New England, stripping the last warmth from the air and replacing it with something sharp and unforgiving. Elena drove through it every morning, dropping Lily at the neighbors. Mrs. Kowalski's hip had healed enough for light supervision, before arriving at the estate at 7 a.m. and leaving just after 6 in the evenings. Something had shifted. She felt it but couldn't name it precisely. Nathaniel had always been present but absent in his own home.
That hadn't changed.
He still took his calls in the study, still worked through lunches that Elena left outside his door, still moved through the house with that particular quality of a man who is technically in a place, but emotionally elsewhere. But there were small differences that she noticed the way she noticed everything, quietly, without making anything of it, filing it away in the part of herself that paid attention to the world, so that Lily wouldn't have to grow up not knowing how. He had started saying good morning. Not elaborately.
Not warmly, even.
Just, when they passed each other in the kitchen, or in the hallway near his study, he would acknowledge her. Not with the brief nod he'd used before, which had communicated "I am aware you exist," but with actual words. "Good morning, Elena." That was all. But it was different. He had also started leaving his coffee cup in the kitchen rather than the study, which meant she saw him for the brief minutes it took him to make it, and occasionally those minutes turned into 5 or 10 while he stood by the window doing that thing she'd noticed before, looking at nothing, waiting for something.
She didn't speak to him during those times.
But she didn't leave the kitchen either. There was something about the shared silence that seemed, to her careful eye, not to bother him the way she might have expected. Lily visited on 3 days a week when Mrs. Kowalski's schedule didn't allow. On those days, the child was a small force of nature moving through the ordered, silent estate, leaving behind her a trail of crayon drawings, half-eaten apple slices, and the kind of noise that is generated by someone who has not yet learned to modulate their enthusiasm to other people's comfort levels. On a Tuesday in mid-November, Elena was changing the linens in one of the guest rooms when she heard voices downstairs. She went very still. Nathaniel was home. He'd had a call rescheduled and come back early, and Lily was in the living room with her crayons, and the combination of those two facts created a specific species of parental anxiety that Elena felt from 2 floors away. She came downstairs quietly and stood in the hallway. Nathaniel was on the floor. He was sitting on the living room floor, the living room with the Persian rug that Elena was quite sure had its own insurance policy, with his back against the couch and his long legs stretched out in front of him, and Lily was standing approximately 18 inches away, presenting him with a crayon drawing with the formality of an ambassador delivering state papers. "This one is Gerald's house," Lily was explaining. "And this is Gerald's car. See, it's red. And this is Gerald at the beach. Gerald likes the beach. Have you been to the beach?" "Yes," Nathaniel said. He was looking at the drawing with what Elena could only describe as genuine attention. Not the polite attention of an adult humoring a child, but the focused, specific attention of someone actually looking. "Gerald wants to go to the beach," Lily reported. "Mama says maybe in the summer. Summer is very far away." She considered this with mild tragedy. "Gerald is patient, though. Gerald is very patient." "Gerald sounds like a good rabbit," Nathaniel said. Lily looked at him. "Do you have a rabbit?"
No.
"Do you have any animals?"
No.
She absorbed this. "Do you have anybody?" A pause. The same pause that had happened in the garage, that quality of a child's question landing somewhere that adult questions couldn't reach, because children don't know they're not supposed to ask. "Not really," Nathaniel said. His voice was very quiet. Lily nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. Then she picked up a blue crayon, sat down beside him with the matter-of-fact confidence of someone who has been invited though no invitation was given, and placed Gerald carefully in Nathaniel's lap. "Gerald can be your friend," she said. "For right now, while I draw." Elena pressed her hand to her mouth. She stood in the doorway and watched Nathaniel Hargrove sit completely still on the Persian rug with a 3-year-old stuffed rabbit in his lap, while the 3-year-old herself drew beside him with intense concentration, occasionally narrating her progress. He didn't move. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't do anything that Nathaniel Hargrove, by any account she had ever read or heard, was supposed to do. He just sat there. And something in his face, she could only see his profile from the doorway, had gone soft in a way she hadn't seen before. Not weak. Not sad exactly. Something quieter than sad. Something underneath sad, where the real thing lived. That evening, after Lily had gone home and the house had resumed its cathedral silence, Elena was finishing the kitchen when Nathaniel appeared in the doorway. "She drew me a picture," he said. He was holding a piece of paper. Elena looked at it. It was a crayon drawing of a tall figure and a very small figure standing next to what was clearly meant to be a car, navy blue, she noticed, and above them, in Lily's careful 3-year-old lettering, Elena's own writing filling in where Lily had dictated, "Nate and Gerald and Lily." "She made me spell it," Elena said. "I tried to correct Gerald, but she said that was how Gerald spelled it." Nathaniel looked at the drawing for a long moment. "I'd like to put it in my study," he said. "If that's all right." Elena's throat did something inconvenient. "Of course," she said. He folded it very carefully, not so it would crease, and carried it upstairs. She heard his study door close with its usual soft, sealed finality. But that night, for the first time since she'd worked there, she saw a light under his study door after midnight. Not the blue-white of a computer screen. Something warmer. He turned on the lamp on his desk, the one she polished every Tuesday, and he was sitting in there with the light on. She didn't know what he was doing. She went to bed. But for the first time in a long time, she fell asleep quickly. It was a Thursday in December, 8 days before Christmas, when Elena got the call. She was in the kitchen, and Lily was upstairs in the small sitting room that Nathaniel had, without announcement or ceremony, simply cleared and made available for Lily on the days she came, stocking it with a small table at the right height and a set of washable markers that he had ordered without telling anyone. Elena had discovered this, standing in the doorway of the previously empty room, and had not been able to speak for a full 40 seconds. The call was from her sister in Phoenix. Their mother had fallen. It wasn't critical, a wrist fracture, not a hip, but the conversation that followed was the kind that families have when the people in it have been avoiding something for a long time, and an injury suddenly makes avoidance feel irresponsible. Her sister's voice was strained. There was money involved and logistics and the old familiar architecture of a family dynamic that Elena had been managing for years from a distance. She was still on the phone, standing at the kitchen sink, voice low and careful, when she became aware of Nathaniel in the doorway. She made a motion, "I'll be a moment, I'm sorry," and he shook his head once. "Don't stop." He went to the coffee maker. She finished the call 7 minutes later, set the phone down, and stood at the sink for a moment with her hands gripping the counter and her eyes closed. "Is your mother all right?" Nathaniel said. She turned. He was leaning against the counter across from her, coffee in hand, watching her with that careful, precise attention she'd noticed him giving to the things that mattered to him. "She will be," Elena said. "It's complicated." "Family," he said. "Not a question."
"Yeah."
She almost left it there. The professional thing was to leave it there. "She's in Phoenix. I haven't been back since. It's been 2 years. My sister thinks I should come for the holidays and I—"
She stopped.
She hadn't meant to say any of that. "You can't afford it," he said. It wasn't cruel, just precise, the way he was about everything. He'd seen her car. He knew what household management specialists were paid. "I can't afford it," she confirmed. There was a silence. Elena started to move. There were things to do. There were always things to do. And Nathaniel said, "I'll arrange the flights."
She stopped.
"What?" she said. "For you and Lily. To Phoenix. For Christmas." He said it the way he said everything, logistical, straightforwardly, without inflection, as if he were scheduling a meeting. "Nathaniel, I can't let you." "It's 4 plane tickets," he said. "I spend more than that on car maintenance." "That's not the point." "What is the point?" he said, and his voice was not unkind, but it was direct, and she realized he genuinely wanted to know. She looked at him. "The point is that I work for you. You don't have to take care of me. I'm not your—" She searched for the word. "You're not my what?" he said. And there was something in his expression, a careful, almost held-breath quality, that made her understand that the answer to this question mattered to him in a way that had nothing to do with employment contracts. The kitchen was very quiet. "She asks about you," Elena said, which was not what she'd intended to say but was, apparently, what came out when she stopped managing herself. "Lily. On the days, she doesn't come here. She asks if you're okay. She tells Gerald things about you." Nathaniel set down his coffee cup. He did it slowly, with the deliberateness of someone buying time. "What does she tell Gerald?" he said. "That you're nice," Elena said. "That you have a big house and a nice car, and that you look like you need an adventure." She paused. "She's 3. She thinks an adventure is finding a good stick." Something moved across Nathaniel's face, something that in another person she might have called a smile, but with him it was subtler, something that happened around the eyes before it reached anywhere else. "I like that definition," he said. "Nathaniel." Her voice was careful. "What are we doing here?" "I'm not entirely sure," he said. "But I don't think I want it to stop." She had known it, she realized. In the garage, in the kitchen, in every small shift and adjustment of the past 2 months. She had known, and she had also not let herself know, because knowing meant deciding, and deciding meant risk, and she had a daughter who had already survived one person who turned out to be less than he appeared. "She's not a prop," Elena said quietly. "Lily, she's not something that makes a good story. She's my whole life." "I know that," Nathaniel said. "And I'm not someone you practice feeling things with and then go back to how you were before." "I know that too," he said. "I know what I'm saying, Elena." His voice had something in it she hadn't heard before. Not the flat, sealed quality of the man who moved through his own house like an airport. Something open. Something that sounded, to her careful ear, exactly like being afraid. "I know it, and I'm saying it anyway." She stood at his kitchen sink in his enormous house and looked at a man who had learned very early that feeling things was dangerous, who had spent 15 years building walls so high and smooth that nothing could get purchase on them, and she watched him choose, deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost, to come down from them. "The flights," she said. "Yes. You're not doing it as my employer." "No," he agreed. "I'm not." She took a breath that felt very large. "We're going to my mother's house," she said. "It's small. My sister's kids are loud. There is no good coffee. I can bring coffee." "Nathaniel." "Elena." She laughed. It surprised her. It surprised both of them, the sound of it in the quiet kitchen, warm and real and slightly undone at the edges. He looked at her when she laughed the way someone looks at something they weren't sure still existed. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. From upstairs, very clearly, Lily's voice drifted down. "Gerald says it's lunchtime." They both looked at the ceiling. Then they looked at each other. And Nathaniel Hargrove, founder and CEO, Forbes cover, 12 acres, sealed windows, started to laugh too. Not the calibrated, social laugh. The real thing. She'd never heard it before. It sounded like someone who had just remembered how. They went to Phoenix for Christmas. Nathaniel had not celebrated Christmas in 4 years. His previous attempts had involved hotel suites and business calls, and the careful construction of a holiday that required nothing of him emotionally, because he had trained himself to associate nothing with safety and everything with exposure. He had been very good at it. He was entirely unprepared for Elena's mother's house. It was small. She had told him this, and he had acknowledged it without understanding it. It was small. It had a couch with a blanket perpetually draped over one arm, and a kitchen that smelled of something baking from 6 in the morning onward, and a Christmas tree that was so thoroughly decorated that it had become more ornament than tree, and Elena's sister's children, 4 of them, ages 2 through 9, who treated the arrival of a stranger in a good coat as an opportunity to conduct a full-scale investigation. He was examined, questioned, and ultimately accepted within approximately 45 minutes, primarily because he was willing to sit on the floor and be a mountain range in an elaborate landscape constructed of couch cushions, throw pillows, and one very patient stuffed rabbit. Elena's mother had a wrist brace and an expression that reminded him of Elena's, that quality of someone who has survived a great deal and chosen, against all reasonable odds, to remain warm. She looked at Nathaniel the way mothers look at people who are important to their children, deeply, unflinchingly, with a calibrated kindness that was nonetheless completely honest. "She told me you have a big house," her mother said on the second morning, finding him in the kitchen at 6 a.m. where he had been awake for an hour and had located the coffee. "She's not wrong," Nathaniel said. Elena's mother looked at him. "She also told me you look sad." He was quiet for a moment. "She told me that too." "Are you still sad?" He thought about it honestly, which was itself new, the willingness to examine the question rather than deflect it. "Less," he said. She nodded, as if this were a satisfactory answer. "Lily doesn't take to people easily," she said. "She's picky. Always has been, even as a baby. Wouldn't let just anyone hold her." She poured her coffee. "She took to you." "I noticed," he said. "So did I," she said. And that was all. On Christmas morning, Lily woke everyone at 5:30 by the simple method of announcing from the hallway, with tremendous authority and no apparent awareness that it was 5:30 in the morning, that Santa had come, and this was urgent. She tore into her gifts with a joyful abandon of someone for whom anticipation has built to an absolutely unsustainable level, and she narrated everything as she did it. "Look at this. Gerald, look at this. Mama, look at this." And Elena sat on the floor beside her with her coffee, watching, and she looked over at Nathaniel, who was sitting in the armchair near the tree because Elena's brother-in-law had insisted, and Nathaniel had not known how to refuse gracefully, and their eyes met. She looked like herself. He had come to understand over these months that Elena spent a great deal of energy managing herself, keeping the walls up, keeping the professional distance, keeping the long-established habit of a woman who had learned that depending on people was a risk not worth taking. But this morning, in her mother's small house, with her daughter tearing open gifts and her family filling every available inch of sound and space, she was purely, uncomplicated herself.
Warm. Real.
Undone at the edges in exactly the right way. He thought, I would like to make her look like that all the time. It was not a complicated thought, but it was, for him, a significant one. Lily had saved one gift for last. She brought it to Nathaniel herself, carrying it in both hands with immense seriousness. It was wrapped in red paper with approximately 60 pieces of tape, which Elena explained in a murmur was because Lily had insisted on wrapping it herself. He opened it carefully. Inside was a picture frame, small, wooden, painted irregularly in blue and yellow because Lily had painted it herself with Elena's guidance. Inside the frame was the original crayon drawing, not a copy, the one from the living room floor, Nate and Gerald and Lily. "So you can keep it in your big house," Lily said. "So you don't forget us when we're not there." He looked at the drawing for a long time. "Lily," he said. His voice did something at the end of her name that he didn't try to fix. "I could never forget you." She looked at him with those dark eyes, Elena's eyes, with the direct, unguarded, absolutely unprotected honesty of a 3-year-old who has never learned that honesty is something you're supposed to ration. "Good," she said. "Because Gerald and I decided we're going to have lots of adventures with you."
She paused.
"If that's okay." He didn't trust his voice enough to use it, so he simply held out his arms. And Lily, who was picky, who didn't go to just anyone, who had spent 3 years of her small life developing an instinct for who was worth trusting and who wasn't, Lily climbed up into his lap, settled herself with the assurance of someone who has already decided a place is home, and pressed Gerald firmly into his hands. "Gerald's going to explain the adventures," she said. "He has a lot of ideas." Across the room, Elena was looking at them. Her coffee had gone cold in her hands. Her sister had come to stand beside her and had put an arm around her shoulders, and Elena was leaning into it, and her eyes were bright with something that she was choosing, this morning, not to manage or contain. Nathaniel looked at her over the top of Lily's curls. "Is this okay?" his eyes asked. She smiled. Not the careful, professional, everything is under control smile she wore to work. The real one. The one underneath. The one he had been, without knowing it, waiting the better part of 3 months to see in its full, unguarded form. Yes, her eyes said back.
"This is okay."
Outside, Phoenix in December was nothing like Connecticut. Too warm, too bright, none of the bone-deep cold he'd grown up with. But something settled in his chest that morning that he recognized, after a moment of turning it over carefully, as a feeling he hadn't felt in so long he'd nearly forgotten it had a name. He felt it while Lily narrated Gerald's adventure plans. He felt it while Elena's family filled the small house with the glorious, undignified noise of people who loved each other well and loudly. He felt it when Elena caught his eye across the room and looked away quickly, the corners of her mouth doing something she was trying and failing to control. He felt like he was somewhere, not passing through. Somewhere. He felt like he was home. And Gerald, for the record, had excellent adventure ideas.
The end. And the beginning.
For every child who looked at a lonely adult and simply decided to love them anyway. And for every adult brave enough to let them.